I mean, that's right. That statement from Ofer Kalderon's family, reflecting, I think, that slightly, I mean, clearly jubilant that he has been released after just under 500 days, but also reflecting the fact that he is in difficult physical health. I mean, the sheer fact of being kept in captivity in conditions that, well, we don't know, but we know will have been extremely grueling, is going to be exhausting for anybody. Ofer Kalderon is half French, and we're saying that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has also welcomed his relief, saying that it is with, I'm just calling up his statement here, Ofer Kalderon is free. We share the immense joy of his loved ones after 483 days of what Emmanuel Macron has described here as an unimaginable hell, and goes on to say that he is also thinking of a man called Ohad Yahalomi, who is another French citizen who remains in custody. I think it is, to be honest, that combination of relief, of joy that these people are out, tempered with anxiety over their physical health, and I think probably no more so than our final hostage, because it would also Palestinian media is reporting that a Hamas commander that Israel previously claimed to have killed is also, according to Palestinian media, is going to be involved in this ceremony to hand over Keith Segal. This is a man called Hatam Hawajiri, commander of Hamas's Shati battalion. So remember that Hamas also uses all of these events as a show of strength, as a show to say that despite the colossal destruction that has happened in Gaza, an area of land that has been reduced to mostly a wasteland of grey rubble and devastation, Hamas is still, at each of these releases, trying to show that it is still there, that it still has guns, still has vehicles, and in this instance, it appears to be saying that it still has one of its commanders who was killed. I think the Israelis probably will be only minorly interested in that. Their question will be, where is Keith Segal? Is he going to come up there? And also, Anna, I have to say, as Yarden Bibas comes back, a question that is being asked again and again is, where is Yarden Bibas' wife? Where are his children? Have they died while being held as hostages, or is this some trick being pulled by Hamas? Are they still alive, still being held hostage, still being held, still being used effectively as pawns? Most people suspect that they have died in captivity, and it is that feeling, as Yarden Bibas is released today, that a lot of people are reflecting on, particularly the death of all of these three people, Shiri, Ariel, and Kafir would be awful, clearly. But Kafir, young baby, less than a year old when captured, has become emblematic for so many in Israel of the horror of October the 7th and the devastating pain of this continuing captivity of hostages, that I think his death in particular would be very hard for this country to take.
And as we await the expected handover of Keith Segal, the third Israeli hostage on today's deal, as part of the arrangement today, we are also expecting more than 180 Palestinian prisoners to be released from Israeli prisons, aren't we? Give us an idea of how that's been coordinated in previous days.
I will do. I'm just going to tell you a bit of news that we've just brought to us. Is Hamas is apparently saying that the delay in releasing Keith Segal is due to what they describe as security processes, apparently during the presence of military leaders. I have no more information about whether that means they are nervous about those people or whether they believe there needs to be enhanced security. That is apparently the cause of the delay. Now, the Palestinian prisoners, it's a more disparate picture for them. These are, once again, a significant number, edging towards 200, over 180 people, some of whom have been imprisoned for the most serious offences, including murder. There will be different locations depending on the gravity of your offence, depending where you're from. So the most serious will be told that they cannot remain in Israeli territory and effectively will be deported. They'll go to one of two places. Some will be taken out of the country into Egypt, and they will either remain in Egypt or will then be onwardly sent to potentially Turkey, potentially Algeria. Conversations have had with Morocco and with other Middle Eastern countries. Some will go into Gaza. Gazan citizens, they will go into Gaza. As for the others, those who broadly have not been convicted of murder, even though these include people who have been involved in, let's say, bomb attacks, they will be brought from various prison locations to one central location, that is a place called Ofer, which is on the edge of Ramallah in the West Bank. They will then the convoy will be created at Ofer prison. The prisoners will be put on coaches, maybe 2, possibly 3 coaches. They'll be driven out of that prison in a convoy. Now, at the front of that convoy will be armoured vehicles from the IDF. There will be a bulldozer involved in that convoy in case there is any obstruction on the road, and they will be driven away from the prison to a point in Ramallah where they will be released. Now, that point has changed. The first releases was held at a roundabout, subsequently at a place in central Ramallah, and then it was the one most recently used was effectively a location next to a rubbish tip. And those people will then be released there, and effectively at that point they are in the hands of Palestinian authorities who will do quite a similar thing. They will give them a medical check and then they will hand them over to friends and family.
And Adam, sorry to cut in, I just wanted to alert you to the pictures that we're seeing on our screen now, as we can see that some kind of signing is going on the stage at that site in Gaza City, where we expect Keith Segal to be handed over, the third hostage to be passed from Hamas to the Red Cross. So this is a similar scene to that we saw in Khan Younis early this morning.
Yeah, as you can see on the left-hand side of that screen, you have representative from the Red Cross. On the right is Hamas. You'll notice the man in the background is actually filming what is going on, and actually the drone there is just never underestimate the extent to which Hamas uses these events as a PR opportunity. They have a number of people who are walking around with pretty sophisticated filming technology, and they will be filming this for their own purposes. This will have been designed as a process that they think can be used for PR. Now we await to see who is coming out of these vehicles. As you might imagine, everyone here in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv is watching and waiting and nervous about whether or not this will be the moment when Keith Segal, the 65-year-old Israeli American native, with so much ties, and there he is. That is Keith Segal emerging. You can hear, I'm sure, Anna, the applause around me here in Hostage Square. Looking pale, but walking. It's hard to know whether those 2 Hamas people with him are holding him up or guarding him. He certainly looks as if he is unsteady on his feet. I remember a previous hostage said that they would rather have stayed in captivity and allow Keith Segal to be freed in their place because of their nervousness. And he waves out to the crowd. The people watching him in Gaza are Palestinians, but here in Hostage Square, there are many, I think, who feel that wave is for them. for those who have worried about his future, about his health. You heard from Alistair early, speaking to Keith Segal's wife on the anniversary of October the 7th. You heard in her voice that tremble, that fear, that anxiety over her husband. Well, now he is on his way out, surrounded by those Hamas operatives. Once again, there is none of the chaos that we saw in Khan Younis a couple of days ago. He has briefly stood on the stage, he has waved, and now he is guided into that vehicle. And Keith Segal, many of these hostages don't have a great idea of what has been going on, not necessarily well informed about what has been happening around them. It's now been guided to another vehicle. Now, there we are seeing a much bigger show of strength. And in fact, Keith Segal is now being led onto, we're seeing again the moment when he's led onto the platform. He's carrying 2 bags with him now, and the sense of relief that he must be feeling is absolutely enormous. And he will shortly be leaving Gaza, and he will be heading to Israel and to freedom after so long in captivity. The third of the 3 hostages to be released today, and we've now seen Keith Segal handed towards the care of the Red Cross and freed from the clutches of Hamas.
And as you say, Adam, a bigger show of strength there in Gaza City, but still orderly scenes, as we saw with the release of the first 2 hostages this morning in Khan Younis. Remind us why these scenes are so much calmer than they were on Thursday. Why do we think that those chaotic scenes that we saw with the release of hostages then haven't been repeated today?
And I think there's 2 questions in that. One is, why was it so chaotic on Thursday? And the second question is, why is it so calm today? Why was it so chaotic on Thursday? Things had been getting more and more of a PR stunt on behalf of those who had been holding the prisoners, the hostages, those who had been holding these hostages in captive. And on Thursday, it is worth saying there were 2 events. The first was in Jabalia, was the freedom of Agam Berger, which was not the chaotic episode. But the second one was in Khan Younis, outside the house of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader who had been killed by Israeli forces, and it turned into a combination of a show of strength by militants, because it's understood that Ab al-Yahud and Gadi Moses may well have been held by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So they had their presence there, Hamas had their presence there, and there simply was no crowd control. And as those 2 terrified hostages were led through the crowd, they were jostled, there were people leaning in front of them, pushing them, taking photos, and I think anybody, and as I said, Hamas have a keen eye on PR. Anybody would have looked at that and said it was dangerous, it was unseemly, it looked chaotic. It was a wholly unedifying and scary spectacle. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, said he was shocked and horrified. He immediately said that he would delay the release of Palestinian prisoners and complain to mediators. And those mediators got in touch with Hamas. And today we understand that Hamas itself has said that it reacted to the requests of mediators and changed the framework of these releases, holding them earlier. It's very clear that it's not allowing people to get near to these hostages as they are released. And so there has been a far greater level of control. That is not to say that this hasn't involved significant show of strength by Hamas. We're looking once again here at the images of Keith Segal, and he is surrounded by men in balaclavas and green bandanas. They are unmistakably Hamas, but there is not the baying mob, and there is not the huge show of weaponry that we saw on Thursday. This is a show of control by Hamas, certainly, but it is not a show of chaos.
And so, as we see Keith Segal, the US-Israeli dual national, being handed over to the Red Cross today, give us a bit of context, Adam. Remind us of what's going on here. This is the fourth day that we've seen releases of hostages and Palestinian prisoners. It's all part of this first phase of the ceasefire deal, isn't it? What is likely to happen next if these hostage and prisoner releases all go smoothly?
Well, that is a huge question. There are 33 hostages due to be released under this first phase, as well as Palestinian prisoners, of course. But this first phase also includes negotiations about the second phase, and there are plenty who think that the second phase will be much harder to push forward with. There are those who think, who are cynical, so let us be honest, about whether or not the second phase will happen. So let me go through it. Stage one, which we're in at the moment, lasts 42 days. It involves a complete ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas releasing, as we said, 33 hostages, including female soldiers. Well, we have already seen those. Children, older men, and the sick, and then, of course, female civilians, which brings us to the question of whether or not that sadly indicates that Shiri Bibas, Ariel and Kafir Bibas have died in captivity. Israel is due to release around 1,900 Palestinian prisoners, and as we've said, that includes those who have carried out the gravest crimes in their minds, multiple murders, people serving long, multiple life sentences. Part of that ceasefire also involved displaced civilians being allowed to return to their neighbourhoods. That's when we saw the Nezarine crossing being closed and crucially aid being allowed in. The second stage, which is negotiations which are due to start next week, would involve a permanent ceasefire. All the remaining live hostages being returned, and Israeli forces completing a complete withdrawal from Gaza. As you might imagine, that will be extremely complicated, extremely politically charged, and will involve a great deal of mediation. This first phase has been emotionally and politically charged, but the second phase will be even more complicated, potentially even more volatile, even more controversial, and one would imagine yet more difficult.
OK, Adam, for the moment, thanks very much. So US-Israeli hostage Keith Segal has been transferred to the Red Cross. They've confirmed that in the last few minutes. And this transfer coming a couple of hours after two other Israeli hostages, Yarden Bibas and Ofer Kalderon, were handed to the Red Cross and have now crossed the border into Israel. So let's get some reaction to this morning's events. I'm joined now by Nomi Bar Yaakov, who's an international negotiator, an expert in diplomacy and the Middle East, who's been working on complex ceasefire and peace agreements for 3 decades. So very good to talk to you this morning. I wonder what you make of this 4th day of hostage and prisoner releases so far.
Thank you, Anna, for having me on your show again. I think that the ceasefire, which is a very, very fragile and delicate ceasefire, is going well. And I'm very confident that it will continue to go well. There have been breaches. There have been expected breaches, but the mediators have managed to overcome them. And we saw there was an unexpected release 2 days ago of 3 hostages and Palestinian prisoners because Hamas didn't stick to the agreed sequence of the hostages to be released. Civilians were supposed to be released before military personnel. And the Qataris, the mediators, were also the guarantors of this agreement. Qatar, Egypt, and the US worked painstakingly and very, very quickly and came up with a solution of adding an additional release so that the civilian hostage in question, Arbel Yahoud, will be able to be released alongside two others. And it was very chaotic 48 hours ago, again, in breach of the agreement. But today we've seen a smooth transfer now of all three hostages. And you can see the crowds jolting, and you can see that there is not easy for Hamas to ensure a smooth transition, but certainly by not informing the crowds of where the transfer is going to be, the point of transfer between the Hamas and the hostages to the International Committee of the Red Cross, which then takes them across the border to Reim in Israel. We have seen today that the transfer has gone smoothly of all three hostages. Two were released early this morning, and Keith Segal, the American-Israeli 65-year-old, looking very, very frail just moments ago.
Yes, and tell us a little bit about these three hostages who've been released today.
Well, this morning's hostage, Yarden Bibas, he is 35 years old, and on your picture, he's the one with the beard. He was kidnapped from near Oz on the 7th of October. So were the others, and his wife, alongside his wife Shiri and two children. Kfir was only 9 months old when he was kidnapped, and Ariel was 4 years old when he was kidnapped. The pictures, Hamas released images and videos of his wife, Shiri, holding the red hairs babies, and they have become the symbol of all of this. I mean, the little one, Kfir, had his first and second birthday in captivity. They're not believed to be alive, which is why they haven't been released. And Hamas released a dreadful video of the time that they informed Yarden that his wife and 4-year-old and baby were no longer among the living, of him weeping. And this was shown all over the world. And in Israel, this has become a real symbol of the struggle to release all the hostages. So his release today, even though he's younger, he's 35 years old, the elderly were supposed to be released first, is extremely symbolic. And that was very important. But again, he's coming back without his wife and without his babies, so very much mixed emotions. But he was standing, and that is very important. His co-hostages that had been released in the first ceasefire in November of 2023 said that he was held in a cage under very, very, very harsh conditions in the tunnel.
So these three hostages
and not treated well. Sorry?
Sorry to interrupt you there. I was just going to say, these three hostages, amongst the 33 who are due to be released in this first phase of the ceasefire, some people are saying the first phase is in many ways the easiest. I mean, this is going to be complex, isn't it? What happens next?
Sorry, I haven't gone around to the other two hostages, but of course, they each have their own story, and very significant that they have been released and standing on their 2 feet. The first phase is the easier phase, even though there have been sort of hitches. But again, I think all the hurdles will definitely be overcome. It's a 42-day phase, 33 hostages to be released, and for every soldier, 50 Palestinians prisoners are going to be released, and for every civilian, 30. The tricky part is the transition to the second phase. The second phase, and the official negotiations are starting on Monday with President Trump meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu in the White House on Tuesday. Unofficially, the negotiations started at the outset, really, of this ceasefire, maybe even before. The issue is that Israel will have to withdraw under the agreement in phase 2 from all of Gaza. And the Israeli Prime Minister and his right-wing coalition have stated very clearly that they do not want to do that. And so the question is, how will they overcome that? Will the Israeli government stand? Will the Prime Minister stand? Will the ceasefire prevail? I think there's mounting pressure from Israel inside, from the population, to ensure that all the hostages return, and everyone knows that that means a full withdrawal from Gaza, so there's no question about the terms. And there's mounting pressure from President Trump, given that, and from the neighboring Arab states and Gulf states, certainly Saudi Arabia and the US are looking to do a big deal, which will involve Israeli normalization with Saudi Arabia, and that will not happen unless phase 2 and 3 actually are implemented, and a Palestinian state alongside an Israeli state will be the end goal. The main problem is that there are no agreed plans for the day after the Israeli withdrawal. There are no agreed plans. The Israeli Prime Minister has refused to discuss the so-called day after. Who will govern Gaza? And that is a very big question. I don't think Hamas is in control of all of Gaza, despite the show of force during the release. We have to remember that the ceasefire agreement is between Hamas and Israel. So Hamas has to deliver. And Hamas is showing with the carefully orchestrated staging that they are in charge. Certainly in the scenes that you are showing now on your screen, they were not in charge of the crowds. This is the release of Arbel Yahud that you are showing, and Gadi Moses, both from kibbutz near Oz, both kidnapped on the 7th of October, held by Islamic Jihad and other factions. We mustn't forget that Hamas are not holding all the hostages, and there are more than 2 factions. It's not just Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Those are the flags that we were seeing on the screen that you were just showing. Those scenes were very worrying, and the ICRC, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, issued a statement saying that this is not acceptable to them and it's in breach of the agreements and international law. And again, we saw that this was remedied, and today there was a smoother transition. But that said, the second phase is and the third phase of the reconstruction will really depend principally on an agreed plan for who will take control of Gaza. The idea being that there will be a technocratic, Palestinian-led government. Clearly, the Palestinians need to govern Gaza with support from the local Arab states and the US and certainly the UK, and on the humanitarian front, there's a role for many countries. But it is complex, and we're not quite there yet.
No, indeed. Well, Nomi Bar Yaakov, we really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for giving your reaction to today's news that 3 Israeli hostages have been released by Hamas. They are Ofer, Kalderon, Yarden, Bibas and Keith Segal. Nomi, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Anna.
Now, let's get you up to date with the day's other stories now. And a developing story from Philadelphia overnight. A small medical transport plane has crashed into a busy residential neighbourhood, setting buildings and vehicles ablaze.
هذه الكحمة اللي هنا قاعد يشكسوا فيها طلعوا لي برا بقول شو
كيف كل صح يعني
كيف
خلوه بس انت ما انا علي خلاص جوين ممتاز جوي طيب الجهاز خلاص تمام يلا نرجع كيف؟ يا احمد شغل شو اسمه اسمع احمد ابطلين خلص خليك تدين على احمد تمام اسمع معايا 400 بدل معايا 400 ونازل وجهه بيضة وجهه خلاص يعني كنا وصلنا خذوا النص في الاخر والله والاسير موجود ما وصل 5 شفت الضغط كل اللي هان كله روح لا بس الباب لازم
whose 12-year-old niece was found dead after Hamas's October the 7th attack. His two children, Erez and Sahar, 12 and 16 at the time of their capture, were released in the first exchange of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. 35-year-old Yarden Bibas was the second hostage to be released this morning. He was taken alongside his wife Shiri and their two sons, 4-year-old Ariel and 10-month-old Ofer, the youngest of Hamas's hostages. It's believed that Yarden could be the only family member still alive. Keith Segal, a 65-year-old dual US citizen, was the third hostage to be handed over today. He was abducted with his wife Aviva Adrienne Segal, who was freed in the first hostage for prisoner exchange in November 2023. And last year he was featured in a video released by Hamas during the Passover holiday, where he was seen breaking down in tears, saying he hoped he would be reunited with his family. Well, the relatives of Ofer Kalderon spoke earlier from Kfar Saba in Israel.
484 days ago, we started a mission. We started a mission to bring our family complete again. After 52 days, we succeeded in half of the mission. We brought back Sar and Erez. And today, after 484 days, we complete the mission. We say, sorry, forgive us, Ofer, that it took so many time. But we completed this mission, and we are so honored to be in this moment. And we demand that 79 families that needs to get these moments again, these moments as well. We will fight until the last hostage that will come back to us. We just want to say thank you, President Trump, Mr. Witkoff. Thank you very much that we succeeded to reach this moment, and we fight for everybody, for the living ones to bring back home, and for the dead ones to bury here in Israel ground. Thank you very much for everybody in Israel, all the people that support us. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
This is it. Thank you.
Well, let's cross live now to Tel Aviv, and we can speak to Adam Parsons, who's there for us this morning. So, Adam, 3 more Israeli hostages handed over by Hamas and on their way back to their families. What did you make of the way in which these handovers were carried out today?
Much calmer, weren't they? They were notably calmer handovers today compared to the chaotic scenes we saw in Khan Younis on Thursday. There were 2 releases on Thursday. One was in Jabalia, Agamberger, which was much calmer, but Khan Younis was chaos. And I think that it left Benjamin Netanyahu said he was shocked at what he described as horrific scenes. And that resulted in him delaying the release of Palestinian prisoners that day until he got confirmation that mediators were going to act to demand things be calmer. Hamas clearly got that message. We understand it's actually acknowledged the fact that mediators asked it to calm things down, and it has done so. Part of the reason it's achieved the calmness today is that things started much earlier, started in the morning. They put a cordon of Hamas operatives around the stage where the hostages were brought to complete the signing ceremony. Things happened, to be honest, much quicker than they had done on Thursday in Khan Younis. And those 2 early hostage releases really came up briefly. We saw the 2 hostages appear, acknowledge the people in front of them and get into a vehicle and be driven off. We had a longer wait for the third of our hostages, Keith Segal, and still not clear why it took that, but Hamas sources suggesting that was to do with security considerations, a message they may even be putting out simply to assuage any lingering doubts from mediators that they are taking this seriously. I think also Thursday's release involved Islamic Jihad, and I think maybe that added to some of the chaos. And we just have got details also about what is happening later on, the Palestinian prisoners, really very interesting, that most of the people, there's just over 180 Palestinian prisoners are going to be released today, involving over 140 of them will be people who are from Gaza, who were arrested after the October 7th attack, so are going to be released not into the West Bank, but will be taken down to Gaza. And there are 7 other prisoners who are being released on life sentences and who will be effectively deported from Israel, and they will return to Gaza as well. So 150 Palestinian prisoners will be returning to Gaza, and only 32 will be returning to the West Bank, will be taken to Ramallah later on today, released via Ofer prison. So that is the highest number by some way that have been returned into Gaza. One of those 32, by the way, going back to the West Bank, we are told is an Egyptian citizen who will be brought to Ramallah, presumably stay overnight in Ramallah, and then will be sent to Egypt. And one notable person who is going to be released is a man called Shadi Amouri, who was involved in a very notorious bombing in the Second Intifada over 20 years ago. This is a bus bombing in a place called Megiddo Junction up in the north of Israel. It was he was involved in the planning of it. It was a suicide bombing attack carried out by a teenager who got on a packed bus, and detonated his bomb, killing 17 people, most of them soldiers, 13 soldiers, but also 4 civilians, and injuring over 40. And as so often with these releases, there will, I'm sure, be those who are in the crowd here at Hostage Square who will be delighted to see the return of their hostages today, but will also feel in their hearts concern that people who have committed grave crimes, who have been sentenced for crimes involving murder or planning of bombings such as this, have been released. As for the crowd here today, well, the Keith Segal, we understand, has either been returned into the hands of the IDF or is just about to be returned into their hands. The released hostages being there, you can see on screen, those are the 2 hostages released at the start who are now being transported by helicopter. So they are leaving the Rein Air Base and they're being flown here to Tel Aviv. As we said earlier, we don't know which hospital they will be sent to, but they are now at Ramat Gan, and they are going to be brought to hospitals in Tel Aviv, one of the 6 hospitals that they have here, in order to receive treatment for the physical injuries, the suffering they've had, and the psychological. And what you're seeing being brought to that helicopter is a tunnel which preserves the privacy of those hostages as they are brought to that helicopter, and we will eventually see that the rotor blades obviously begin to turn, and that helicopter will lift off, and those hostages will be brought back here to Tel Aviv.
Yes, and Adam, the IDF is confirming that Ofer Kalderon, at least, had taken off in an Israeli Air Force helicopter to the hospital. They said he will reunite with members of his family as well as receive medical treatment there. And they said that Yarden, Bibas and his family were due to take off soon to fly to the hospital. But they released that about 20 minutes ago, so he may well be there too. And tell us a little bit about these individuals who have been released today.
So they are a contrast. Ofer Kalderon is a 54-year-old who was snatched from a kibbutz along with two of his children. Now his children, Sahar and Erez, were released back at the end of last year. Ofer Kalderon was kept in captivity as a hostage and has now been let out and is welcome released by the Israeli government and also by the French government. He is a Franco-Israeli citizen, dual citizen, and that's released by, celebrated by Emmanuel Macron as well. Yarden Bibas is extreme, one of the highest profile hostages in Israel for the simple reason that the images and the story of Yarden Bibas and the capture of his family have really affected many people here. He's 35. We know that he is safe. There was an image of him when he was captured with blood pouring from his head and a Hamas militant behind him holding a hammer which appears to have blood on it. So he seemed very badly injured, but he was captured along with his wife Shiri and their children, Ariel, who was just a toddler, and Kefir, who was less than 1 year old, the youngest hostage to be taken. And the fact that Shiri was not released, along with the other female civilian hostage, Yahel Yehud, has really graced, I think, a lot of people in this country that she's not alive. Now, Hamas claimed a while ago that Shiri and the two children had been killed in an IDF airstrike. The Israelis, of course, did not confirm that fact, but Hamas was insistent that that was true. I think everyone here in Hostage Square, everyone in Israel, has been hoping against hope that it wasn't true, that Shiri, Ariel and little Kafir would return from captivity. But so the sight of Yarden Bibas on his own being released is enormously bittersweet for many people here who are still hoping against hope that the rest of his family is alive. And we are waiting for him to be returned to Tel Aviv. Keith Segal is 65. He's a man who was in poor health. We knew that from one of the earlier hostages who actually offered to swap places with Keith Segal for him to be released ahead of Emily Damari because of her friendship with his daughter. Well, we've seen him today. He walked up onto the stage. He looked pale. He looked quite drawn, but he was able to walk with some assistance. He is an Israeli-American citizen, and of course the intricate involvement of the American government in negotiating the ceasefire and overseeing it means that his profile is very high. His wife was captured but then released, and she has campaigned tirelessly to keep his profile high, and is now obviously ebullient that he has been released. Keith Segal, we're told, has now met the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and is on his way to that helicopter pad in order that he too can be returned to Israel. And the Israeli government, in a statement from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, says the Israeli government embraces the return of Keith Segal. His families have been informed by the designated authorities that he is a member of our forces. The Israeli government is committed, it says, to the return of all abducted and missing persons.
Adam, thanks very much indeed. So Ofer Kalderon, Yarden Bibas and Keith Segal all handed over by Hamas to the Red Cross. And as Adam was saying, the Israeli military confirming that it's now received the third of those hostages, Keith Segal, on a day where later we will see Palestinian prisoners, more than 180 of them, also released. We'll have plenty of coverage of this story throughout the day, of course. In the meantime, the day's other news and a developing story from Philadelphia overnight. A small medical transport plane has crashed into a busy residential neighborhood, setting buildings and vehicles ablaze. The aircraft
זה בטוח ירדן. אני יודע שאני אומר לך אופן הזה. עכשיו? Okay, convoy? Convoy? No? Okay, I'm going to the convoy. Okay? Just letting you know.
Çok güzel.
Yeah, don't be. Okay. פחם. אז
יש מקום טוב יותר להיות בו?
עכשיו פה מצאים את השיירה. פה מצאים את השיירה. משם אפשר להיות
השיירה
המסוקים.
כבר מגיעה?
כן, כן.
הנה מגיעה.
הנה.
זאת לא השיירה.
לא, אם אנשים עכשיו מתחילים לזוז, השיירה מגיעה.
It's coming.
It's coming.
Early this morning, we've already seen 3 Israeli hostages handed over from Hamas to the Red Cross, and then subsequently we've had confirmation from the Israeli military that they have been put into their hands. But those scenes were pretty orderly in contrast to scenes of Israeli hostages on Thursday, which were relatively chaotic. And now, as you can see, extraordinary scenes there. You saw that guy leap into the arms of one of the prisoners who is being released. Huge crowds there gathering around them as they come off that bus. As I say, 183 in total today. These are all part of a phased release of both prisoners and hostages as part of phase 1 of the ceasefire deal that's been struck between Israel and Hamas. Phase 1 involves 33 Israeli hostages being released in return for around 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. After this phase, the question is what happens next. There'll be 2 more phases and negotiations will start shortly into how that will play out, because there are still more Israeli hostages who are still being held by Hamas. So this is the next stage of today's releases as those Palestinian prisoners are released into the crowds there in Gaza. So just to remind you of what happened earlier on today, we saw the release of 3 Israeli hostages. Ofer Kalderon, first of all, and Yarden Bibas. They were released in Khan Younis earlier on this morning, followed by a 3rd hostage, Keith Siegel, a joint US citizen. That was a couple of hours later. There was a bit of a delay on his release, and we were told that there were some security concerns around that, which held things up. He was then released and handed over in a ceremony in Gaza City. All 3 hostages were handed over in a ceremony to the Red Cross, and we saw those Red Cross vehicles disappearing, only to get confirmation a little bit later from the Israeli military that they then moved into Israeli hands. And then, as part of this coordinated release, day of releases today, we're now seeing this latest stage with Palestinian prisoners being released from prison. Clearly, this is 1 busload. A total of around 183 are expected to be released throughout the course of the day. Also today, the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt is reopening after this 4th phase of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners are released, where we will see a number of evacuations of injured taking place across that crossing. So extraordinary scenes there in Beit Tuna as those Palestinian prisoners come off the bus there, to extraordinary reception there amongst the crowds. A very different scene to the one we saw earlier on when the Israeli hostages were released, with Hamas supporters around them. But our correspondent Adam Parsons was watching those scenes of the Israeli hostages play out from a square in Tel Aviv, which has become known as Hostage Square, and we could see the cheers from the crowds there as those Israelis were released earlier on this morning. And of course, this all part of a phased release of hostages and prisoners, part of phase 1 of the ceasefire agreement that was struck between Israel and Hamas on the 17th of January. This first phase lasts for 6 weeks. It will see 33 hostages released and around 1,000 Palestinian prisoners also released. And of course, the deal follows 15 months of fighting between Israel and Hamas after those attacked on the 7th of October. The hope is that this ceasefire will hold and that the negotiations over the next few days for the next phases can pass off successfully. We'll have plenty more coverage of the latest step in today of releases in the next hour.
It has just gone 10 o'clock. You're watching Sky News. This is Matt Barbette in London, and these are live pictures coming from Batunia as Anna was just talking to you about the release of Palestinian prisoners following the release earlier in two separate stages of 3 Israeli prisoners who are being held in Gaza as well. As you can see, some 183 Palestinians are expected to be released today after those 3 Israeli hostages were released. The third release of Israelis by Hamas in Gaza in the past couple of weeks. Our colleague Adam Parsons is in Israel and joins us now. Adam, just bring us up to speed on what we're seeing here, because this is obviously part of the deal, as Anna was saying just before the top of the hour, part of the ceasefire deal.
Yeah, good morning, Matt. This is Batunia, which is a suburb of Ramallah in the West Bank. And what you're seeing here are some of the prisoners who have been released today as part of this prisoners swap. There's going to be just over 180 prisoners released. Most of them this time will actually be going into Gaza itself. So around 150 will be going into Gaza, but these are the ones who are being returned to the West Bank. So this is the edge of Ramallah. They have changed a few times the location where Palestinian prisoners are returned to, but Batunia is quite near Ofer, which is the prison, the Israeli detention facility on the edge of Ramallah, where prisoners are brought in that coach, that white coach. When there are more prisoners, they have more than one coach. Maybe today there's only one, guided out from Ofer prison by an Israeli military convoy, and then eventually the coach itself is simply released off. And as you can see at this point, people are now being released, those prisoners are now being released into, well, that crowd. And as you can see weapons there, you can see it. I was in one of those crowds myself last weekend. They can be quite chaotic, but they are also very good-natured because everyone is there to welcome back. And you can see, Matt, the vociferous applause that is given to each of these prisoners who will be released from that coach. These 180-odd prisoners are being released, of course, in response to the release of 3 hostages, Ofer, Kalderon, Yarden, Bibas and Keith Siegel. But if we look, there are prominent names among the prisoners who are being released, probably not there in the West Bank, but some of the most prominent prisoners are being expelled from the country. Shadia Mori, who was responsible for planning the 2002 Megiddo Junction attack, he's going to be deported from Israel. 17 people killed in that attack, for instance. Those life prisoners are being sent out to out of Israeli jurisdiction and either into Gaza or out of the country entirely. But among these prisoners are those who have still committed very, very serious crimes, potentially the planning of attacks rather than what is considered murder itself. And for instance, just a couple of days ago, a man called Zachariah Zabedi was released, and he was allowed to return to Ramallah, and we met him yesterday. He is a man who was responsible, so the Israeli military courts discovered, for planning an attack that killed 6 people, but who has now taken on an almost sort of mythic status as a Palestinian leader. You can see the people coming out of that bus are all wearing grey uniforms. Those are given to them by the Israeli prison authorities. you can see that person has now been placed in a wheelchair and is being taken away for medical examination. It's a similar process to the release of hostages, is that all of these Palestinian prisoners will now be taken to a building that's been repurposed for doing medical examinations. They'll be checked over and then they will either be taken to a different medical facility or they will be put into the care of Palestinian authorities. Sometimes they will be looked after by families and friends. Others will be booked into hotels as they, and this is an uncomfortable comparison for some, these people will also in some cases need physical health support or psychological support. Among these will be people who have been in prison for a very, very long time. I met a man yesterday who had been in prison for 23 years. Now, as I said, about 150 of these 183 prisoners will be sent off to Gaza, and some of them are convicted of exceptionally serious crimes.
Yes.
I've mentioned to you Shadi Amorim. I'm going to tell you about another couple. Ramzi Salah is an Islamic Jihad terrorist from Jabalia, of course in Gaza, and the Israelis said that he had intended to blow himself up at a nuclear reactor and was caught in the western Negev with an explosive belt, and he said that he had been involved in planning several attacks. So he is considered by them very serious criminal. Munir Rabia, an Islamic Jihad terrorist from the central Gaza Strip, again is alleged to have planned to blow himself up in a suicide attack. So in the mind of Israelis, Matt, some of the people who are being released today are extremely serious criminals, and the Palestinian Prisoners Office, who are the intermediaries in these releases, giving details about so many of these prisoners.
Yes,
many
Adam,
of them
they've released
will
some figures, in
complain
fact.
about their treatment. Yeah, well, many of these people, Matt, will complain about their treatment in Israeli prisons. I've spoken to a number of these Palestinian prisoners. They uniformly will say that they have been ill-treated in prison. They will show you wounds. They will show you where they say they have been shackled. And again, as so often with these things, that will create a sharply divided response. From the Palestinians will say that they have been ill-treated. They will consider these people to be Palestinian political prisoners. Here I am, where I am in Israel, these people will be derided as extremists, as dangerous, as murderous, and there will be many in Hostages Square, where I'm standing, who will bemoan the fact that these prisoners are being given their liberty back.
Yeah, Adam, I was going to say, looking at the numbers from the Palestinian Prisoners Club, out of the 183 being freed today, 18 had life sentences, 54 were serving long sentences, and 111 were arrested after the 7th of October attacks in 2023. I also need to correct myself. Earlier on I said this was the third exchange. This is the fourth since the ceasefire today. And let's just remind ourselves, Adam, of what happened earlier in terms of the Israelis who were released by Hamas in Gaza.
So earlier we had the release of 3 hostages. There was, and it was a 2-stage process. First of all, in Khan Younis, there was the release of 2 people, one of whom is a French dual national, Ofer Kalderon, who's 54. And alongside him was Yarden Bibas, who's 35. The man you're looking at there is Ofer Kalderon. Now he looks considerably happier than Yarden Bibas, and I say that with the caveat that none of these people are happy. These people have been in captivity for nearly 500 days. But this is really, these people are It's the story of two men who each went into or attacked with two children. Ofer Kalderon's children, Sahar and Erez, were both released in a previous ceasefire back at the end of last year. And we have seen Ofer Kalderon back here, well, certainly not in Tel Aviv, but we have seen his response after release. He has been waving at people, he's been greeting people, even in the street. He has struck a happy note. But that man that you briefly saw there is Yarden Bibas. And his is perhaps the story that troubles people in Israel more than anything. That is Yarden Bibas there in the red, the top with the red at the side of it. He was captured alongside his wife Shiri and his two boys, Ariel, who was 4, Kafir, who was 9 months old, and they were captured on October the 7th. And the images of the two boys, Ariel and Kafir, red-headed boys, striking images of them, have been seen again and again in Israel. But people have been hoping for their safe return. But not long after they were captured, the end of 2023, Hamas claimed that Shiri, Ariel and Kafir had all been killed in an Israeli airstrike. It was never confirmed by Israel, but there has been a growing sense that that those three people, Shiri, Ariel and Kafir Bibas, had died. But it's been matched by an optimism among a great section of the Israeli population that was effectively too awful to be true. People wanted desperately to believe that they had survived. We would have expected to see Shiri, Ariel and Kafir to have appeared before now. And I think when we saw earlier here in Hostages Square, Yarden Bibas greeting his father, the place fell silent because Yarden Bibas looked so devastated. So I think there is a grim feeling here that he will be the only member of that family to return. And a man said to me, Yarden Bibas has left hell and will now enter a different sort of hell. The person you just saw there was Keith Siegel, who was released in the second stage. He was released in Gaza City a little longer. It took a little later for him to be released. Still not wholly clear why that happened. It's understood there were security concerns expressed by Hamas. He's 65, a dual Israeli and American national, understood to be in bad health. But up on the stage, he walked up there with assistance, as you can see there, waving to the people around, and was then guided towards a Red Cross vehicle. Yes. I think something noticeable about these releases was they were so much more orderly, so much calmer than the chaos that we had seen on Thursday. I think the bottom line is that the Israeli government had been furious about that chaos, and the message had gone to mediators that it could not be repeated. And I think Hamas, an organisation that has always got an eye on PR, realised that it did not serve anybody for the released hostages to be exposed to such fear. And so today, a much, much more orderly process of these three people, Ofer Kalderon, Yarden Bibas and Keith Siegel, to be returned. And all three have now left Gaza and are all back now in the care of Israeli authorities.
Yes, Adam, certainly powerful images, both from just on the edge of Ramallah in the West Bank with the release of Palestinians there, and also those Israeli dual nationals, a couple of them, those Israelis being released in what looked like a very staged, managed release in Gaza as well, certainly in stark contrast, as you say, to previous releases in Gaza too. And these are live images coming from Tel Aviv, from Hostage Square, where, of course, people have been waiting for news of Israelis and Israeli dual nationals to be released in Gaza as well. But just to bring you up to speed, earlier on, 3 men were released by Hamas in 2 separate releases. And that's then been followed by 183, or certainly the start of the release of 183 Palestinians by the Israelis in Betunia, which is on the edge of Ramallah in the West Bank, just northwest of Jerusalem. And that was Adam Parsons, our correspondent there, who we were hearing from. To the US now, where 6 people have been killed.
ויש הרבה סימפטומים שאנחנו יודעים שהם סימפטומים של טראומה. פחד והתכנסות ושמחה גדולה וניסיון לחזור לתפקוד רגיל. קשה מאוד להגיד שאנשים חזרו לתפקוד, והילדים גם הם. וחשוב לדעת שהם צריכים הרבה תמיכה. ומקבלים את התמיכה הזאת, יש עובדים סוציאליים שמלווים אותם ואת המשפחות שלהם, ונותנים תמיכה שהיא
כלומר, את אומרת בעצם, אל תתבלבלו. גם אלה שחזרו בפעימה הראשונה בנובמבר, אנחנו נמצאים שנה וחודשיים אחרי, עדיין רחוקים משיקום.
לא נגיד בתחילתו, אבל דקה אחרי התחילה. והשיקום הזה הוא ארוך ומפרך, ואני חושבת שחשוב שמדינת ישראל תדע שזה משהו שהוא ארוך הלב ולתמיד, ואנחנו נהיה שם, כל המשרדים שקשורים לזה, משרד הרווחה והביטוח הלאומי ומנהלת החטופים, יש תמיכה מאוד מאוד גדולה.
אנחנו מדברים על היום המורכב הזה, בעיקר בגלל ירדן ביבס. איך מתחילים בכלל לגשת כאנשי מקצוע לסיפור כל כך מורכב?
שם בתחנה הבטחת כי תשוב כבר חלפה שנה שחר הפציע הוא לא הגיע מתי תשוב אליי שושנים קלעתי מפרחי גנאים עטרת ותפארת לראש חתני שחר הפציע הוא לא הגיע מתי תשוב אליי.
Diplomacy at the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, Daniel Sheck. Good morning to you. Your reaction to the images we're seeing from both Gaza and the West Bank this morning?
Well, it's very emotional images like in all the other instances of hostages being freed. You know, you think about these families who've been battling often in complete darkness about the fate of their loved ones. And here they are stepping off a helicopter or off a car and finally finding the embrace of their families. These are big moments, but it's always bittersweet because not all of this is good news, and there are still many more tears of sadness that will be shed.
Yes, I think we were just seeing an image of Ofer Kalderon just a moment ago, who was closely followed by Yarden Bibas. It's difficult for all involved and those who've missed them and loved them, but Yarden Bibas in particular, terrible fate that fell on his family.
I don't really know how to answer this. I mean, clearly there's profound anxiety and fret about the fate of the rest of the Bibas family, which have become a household name worldwide. The images of a mother in total panic holding two babies in her arms is something that has become something somewhat of a symbol this inconceivable tragedy of 251 hostages who were snatched out of their beds in early morning, and without disregarding the condition of the hostages, from babies to elderly people, sick people, disabled people. They all found themselves in Gaza. Some, a certain number were released over a year ago, but the rest have spent 15, 16 months in captivity. So yes, Yarden Bibas is coming home, but we don't know what the fate of his family is.
And we're also seeing the image of Keith Siegel, who's a dual US-Israeli national, being stage managed there. Can I ask you how you respond to the stage management that's being done by Hamas around this? Clearly, these pictures we're seeing now are quite different to the first hostage release we saw in Gaza a couple of weeks ago.
To be honest, I find it a little bit ridiculous. I mean, do these people really think that the hostages are leaving with a big smile and waving to the crowds, and this is sort of an honest and spontaneous gesture? Everybody knows that this is all a well-planned scene that they have been asked to, a scenario they have been asked to follow. But it's really not important. What I do find important, and that I with a lot of satisfaction and relief, is to see that these really dangerous scenes of a huge crowd sort of bearing onto the hostages and crushing them, and it resembled a lynching scene rather than a liberation scene. These things have been eliminated from these procedures thanks to the intervention of the mediators. 3 days ago, it was terrible to see, and there was a protest handed over through both the families, but also obviously the Israeli government, to the mediators, and we were assured that this would not be repeated. And luckily, today, we saw a much more manageable scenario of the handover to the Red Cross.
In the meantime, well, in response to those 3 men being released by Hamas, we're seeing more than 180 Palestinians being released as well in Betunia, on the edge of Ramallah in the West Bank. How do you feel about seeing those pictures?
I think no decent human being will feel good about releasing people who have a lot of blood on their hands. These are, in many cases, convicted terrorists, and nobody likes to see them walk away. But quite honestly, this is not an issue for the families of hostages. It's not for them to evaluate the value of the lives of their loved ones. They have a single issue fight, and that is to release their own hostages. And I can just hope that this is a kind of transaction that we will never see again. But currently, this is part of the price, and it has to be paid in order to save lives.
Daniel Sheck, in terms of how this continues, my final question is your thoughts, please, on how the process is being followed at the moment by both sides and how you hope it will continue.
So clearly the Families Forum is focused on one thing only in the next weeks and months, and that is to make sure that this deal, which has 3 phases, will go through till the very end. There are still many hostages, many of them still alive. Others we know are no longer alive, but they still are considered hostages and need to be brought back to their families for decent burial. So that is our focus. And we see Ofer and Keith and Yarden today, but our thoughts are already to the next lists. Unfortunately, this is a very strung out process, and it's nerve-wracking for the families. But we stand strong, and we will continue the fight until the very last hostage.
I do have a supplementary question, even though I said that was my last, just based on what you said there. It certainly is a strong
I won't
output.
hold it against you.
No, fair enough. Look, it certainly is a lengthy process. It seems unpredictable as well to a degree. Can I ask you, do you remain more or less, or perhaps the same, in terms of optimism now that the whole process will be seen through to the end?
For once, optimism has nothing to do with this. There needs to be a clear demand by the mediators and the international community. They have a very, very important role here to make sure that both sides, who quite honestly signed this agreement not out of perfect enthusiasm, but with a certain amount of arm twisting and coaxing, that these mediators in the international community stay focused and have a watchful eye on all sides. Clearly, the Trump administration has a very particular role here. Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to Washington next week, and we expect and hope that the message that he will get from President Trump, who has been very instrumental in getting this agreement going, that the message will be clear, that he expects both sides, the Israeli and Hamas side, to go through until the very end of this agreement.
Daniel Sheck from the Missing Families Forum. Appreciate your time on Sky News this morning. Thank you very much indeed.